Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I would have you know that when you serve politically, many seem to think that you have no sense, you're corrupt, and that you come to take and not to give. But I know that my colleague, Minister Clark, and myself and others truly have the best interest of Jamaica at heart. And we do come with a little bit of experience and training and skills. Having said that, let me just say how pleased I am to be here this morning with the FID and partners to share and engage on this very important topic of widening the use of the Proceeds of Crime Act through collaboration. I'm so pleased that my longtime friend, the very distinguished Professor Ali, will be your guest speaker. We used to know each other when we were students back in London, students of the law. I share the view that Professor Ali is most able in this area, and I hope that I can stay to hear some of it. Everyone has spoken about the interesting timing of today's event. I see it slightly differently. It is not just because there is outrage about allegations of financial crimes and impropriety in a section of the financial services sector, but it is happening at a time when the public sector is being transformed. And I'm pleased that the Minister of Finance and the Public Service has been spearheading a historic transformation through the public sector compensation reform work that will inure to the benefit of all of Jamaica. Why do I say so? Because the burden of law enforcement falls to the government. And time has come for everyone to understand that those who work in government and those who discharge the function of state and government must come with a special understanding of what that burden entails. And increasingly, there can be no place for complacency. There can be no place for dropping the ball, no place for skylarking. There has to be a thorough understanding of the exigency of the service. And even when your own conditions of service are less than ideal, such is the nature of public service, because we come to guard the public interest. And so I'm excited by the opportunity of the timing, because it is said that in every crisis there is opportunity. The timing also brings heightened awareness in a large section of the public about what is required to safeguard the revenue, to safeguard the public purse. Financial crimes are particularly egregious because they can bring not only people to their knees, but an entire nation. They can bring the government to its knees by disabling it in a way that will prevent it from making appropriate and timely provisions of goods and services to meet the needs of the people. I think it is also important to understand the link between the financial crimes and the wider crimes in the society. I know the Andrew Holness administration is grappling with the high murder rate reflective of wartime. And the data that we assess shows that what presents itself in chaos and disorder, murder, gang and gun running, all of those are actually part of organized crime. That is what the data is showing. That is what the intelligence is showing. But when you have to charge a crime, it requires much more than suspicion, because suspicion is not sufficient to found guilt. It requires much more than say so. The law sets out burden of proof and standard of proof, and it requires time, to convert intelligence to evidence to prove cases. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the law regulates relationship between people. It reflects values of the society. And it is said that the law in society is a living organism based on factual and social reality that is constantly changing. Sometimes the change is minor and gradual and cannot be noticed without the proper distance and perspective. Sometimes change in law precedes a social change and is even intended to stimulate it. In most cases, however, a change in the law is the result of a change in social reality. When social reality changes, the law must change too. When social reality changes, those who enforce the law must also change their approach. Just as change in social reality is the law of life, responsiveness to changes in social reality is the life of the law. And this leads me to sharing with you some of what we hope to do on the constitutional reform front to ensure that those who choose to benefit from a criminal lifestyle will have no place to hide and no place to run. As I thought about the topic of widening the use of the Proceeds of Crime Act, the POCA, I reflected on what was foremost in my understanding of POCA when it was passed back in 2007, and that was the criminal lifestyle aspect. The person who is regarded as having a criminal lifestyle, the one who benefits from conduct constituting crime, and the law sets out a schedule of those crimes. And, they include thievery, as them say, those who thief, whether you thief in the private sector or in the public sector, larceny as a servant, embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, those who earn the money, blood money, criminal money, and then try to clean it up. And so it stands to reason that the use of the POCA cannot and should not be limited to the FID or the revenue. And if for no other reason, I'm so pleased that this conference is taking place at this time to remind. Now, where we sit in government, there is a call for new laws all the time. But I've always said, have we taken stock of the laws that we have? Because generally, our problem is not that we need new laws, but that we need to use the laws that we have. Because Jamaica is usually first out of the block in passing laws. And the reason why we have been first, from my own research, is that we have been so economically impoverished for a long time. We have had to rely so much on international assistance, and invariably, a condition precedent to our benefiting from aid is the passing of certain laws. It's a sad reality. It's really a sad reality, because the urgency that is required in the lawmaking process is not always there unless and until there is something to be gained. But I'm happy to say that times are changing, and certainly the Holness administration realizes that we have to act in Jamaica's interest. Getting a proper legal and constitutional framework is not dependent on what our international partners tell us, important as that conversation, dialogue, and partnership is. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there is an important collaboration that will have to take place in order for us to better enable the FID and law enforcement in general in Jamaica to do its work. We are embarking on the most significant constitutional reform work to be undertaken in the nation of Jamaica since the attainment of independence in 1962. To change the provisions of the Constitution, we will have to collaborate, the government side of Parliament with the opposition side of Parliament, and all of Parliament with the people of Jamaica, because the kind of changes that we desire to make are to the provisions which have special protection. In the National Security Council, we look at a number of issues requiring response legislatively and even constitutionally. And among the many issues that we grapple with is the form of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom that we now have. Revolutionary when it was amended and enacted in 2011. But the question has arisen as to whether we have gone from one extreme to the next, or whether we have moved the spectrum too far. We have moved too far along the spectrum because we encountered severe issues in law enforcement, the respect for rights and freedoms. And so there is one matter that I wish to share with you before I take my seat. One of the provisions that we are looking at is the protection of the right to due process. And constitutionally, every person who is charged with a criminal offense is presumed to be innocent until he is proved or has pleaded guilty. That is sacrosanct across all legal systems. So it's one thing to allege wrongdoing, but when you escalate the allegation to a formal charge, then there is due process, and you cannot return a conviction either by way of a finding of guilt or from a plea of guilty without a due process. When the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom was reviewed, a provision that existed in the former Chapter 3 of the Constitution was written out. And my research tells me that I can't see any indication of a deliberate decision that was taken to write out the provisions, though I have seen from the notes of the meetings the thinking of the constitutional law experts that assisted the governments, because the change took place across administrations led by different political parties. So in the old Section 20, subsection 5, there was a proviso to this provision about the presumption of innocence. And the proviso, in effect, provided for an evidential burden. So the provision which speaks to the presumption of innocence is a legal burden which never shifts. And it said that, provided that nothing contained in or done under the authority of any law shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of the provision to the extent that the law in question imposes on any person charged the burden of proving particular facts. So all who are calling for speeding up of the unexplained wealth provisions or the changes to the law it is my considered view that we will have to make an amendment to the protection of the right to due process provision of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom to reinstitute this provision. Now, it is not one that can happen without the support of the parliamentary opposition. The government is already clear on the direction it wishes to go, but it is an entrenched provision of the law, of the Constitution, and if we do not have the support of the parliamentary opposition to reinstate this provision, we will have to put it to the people in the referendum. And the constitutional standard is that a vote of 2/3 of the electorate will be required, a mighty high hurdle. I use the opportunity to say that I expect collaboration from the parliamentary opposition, as I do from the people of Jamaica, as we seek to put law enforcement on the right path and to protect the revenues of the country and to ensure that all who choose to engage in criminal activities will have no place to hide. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.